Welcome to Synapse Daily, the Cybernetic Ghost. Chapter 1, The New Genesis, The Birth of the Feedback Loop. Imagine a world where the fundamental distinction between a heartbeat and a ticking clock simply vanishes. The year is 1948. A man named Norbert Wiener, a brilliant and often misunderstood mathematician at MIT, publishes a book that will haunt the next century. It is titled Cybernetics, or Control and Communication in the Animal and the Machine. At its core, the book proposed a radical, almost terrifying idea that the laws governing a steam engine, a computer, and a human being are identical. Wiener wasn't just a mathematician, he was a prophet of the feedback loop. During World War II, he worked on anti-aircraft guns. He noticed that the gun was more than metal and gunpowder. It was a goal-seeking organism. It tracked a plane, missed, calculated the error, and adjusted. This error correction is what Wiener called feedback. He looked at the human body and saw the same thing. When you reach for a glass of water, your brain constantly measures the distance between your hand and the glass, correcting the movement in real time. If that feedback loop breaks, you develop a tremor. Wiener realized that if you could map the feedback loop of a machine, you could map the feedback loop of a society. By 1968, this wasn't just an academic theory. It had become a secular Bible for the architects of the modern state. The world shifted from the age of matter to the age of information. In the old world, power was measured in coal, steel, and physical territory. In the new world, the 1968 world power was measured in the flow and control of data. But here is the question that should keep you up tonight: if a machine can be taught to act with human purpose, can a human be stripped of purpose and forced to act like a machine? Chapter 2, The Year of Fire and Silicon, 1968. 1968 was a year of fire, blood, and profound structural shifting. While the streets of Chicago were screaming with the sound of police batons, and Vietnam was a meat grinder for a generation's youth, a quiet, silent revolution was being codified in the halls of power. The Great Society was fracturing under the weight of civil rights struggles and an unpopular war. Inside the air-conditioned silence of MIT and the brutalist concrete offices of the Pentagon, the government was desperate. They were terrified of the chaos on the nightly news. They needed a way to predict the unpredictable. They needed a technology of command and control. They found it in the institutionalization of Wiener's legacy. In 1968, cybernetics moved from the fringe of weird science to the bedrock of American governance. The elite bureaucracy began to view the United States not as a collection of citizens, but as a massive biological organism in crisis. If there was a fever in the form of a riot, the system needed feedback in the form of surveillance to apply correction in the form of policy or force. This was the birth of the systems man. These were the bureaucrats who believed that poverty, war, and social unrest were simply data processing errors that could be solved with enough computing power. They stopped seeing people. They started seeing nodes. Do you feel like a sovereign individual today? Or do you feel like a data point being optimized by an algorithm that was designed in the shadow of 1968? Chapter 3, The Mathematician Who Feared His Own Creation. To understand the institutionalization of 1968, we must understand the tragedy of Norbert Wiener himself. Wiener was a child prodigy of legendary proportions. He graduated high school at 11, earned a PhD from Harvard at 18, and studied under the greatest minds in Europe. But he was a man haunted by the ethical implications of his genius. He coined the word cybernetics from the Greek kybernetes, the steersman of a ship. He believed that the universe was a constant battle between information and entropy. Entropy is the heat death of the universe. It is chaos, noise, and the eventual silence of all things. Information is the only thing that fights entropy. It is the signal in the noise. Wiener was a deeply moral man. After the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, he felt a profound sense of guilt for the role of scientists in war. He became a pacifist, famously refusing to take military funding for his research. He warned that if we treated humans like machines, we would eventually treat them as expendable parts. By 1968, however, Wiener had been dead for 4 years. His warnings were buried under piles of classified research. The institutions DARPA, the CIA, and the RAND Corporation took his brilliant mathematical proofs and discarded his ethical pleas. They took the Steersman and replaced the human hand with a computer processor. They wanted the efficiency of the feedback loop without the messy morality of the man who discovered it. Wiener once wrote a book titled The Human Use of Human Beings. By 1968, the government was interested in the institutional use of human beings. Chapter 4, The Architecture of Control, ARPANET and Beyond. In 1968, a specific project was being finalized that would fundamentally reorder human civilization. It was called the ARPANET. The military-industrial complex had a survival problem. How do you maintain control after a nuclear exchange? A centralized command center is a target. If you kill the brain, the body dies. They needed a cybernetic network. This was Wiener's biological nervous system applied to global telecommunications. They designed a decentralized network where information was broken into packets. If one node was vaporized by a missile, the packets would simply find another route. The system was designed to be indifferent to its own parts, as long as the information reached its destination. In 1968, the first interface message processors, IMPs, were being commissioned. This was the moment the post-industrial society was born. We transitioned from being a nation of makers to a nation of users and data generators. But there is a dark irony here. If the internet was designed to survive a nuclear winter, it was designed to be cold. It was designed to be purely logical, devoid of human empathy. In 1968, they institutionalized a world where the system is more important than the self. The feedback loops weren't just for computers, they were for us. The network began to observe us, to learn from our output, and to adjust our environment to keep us within the parameters of the system. Are we the ones using the network today? Or are we just the biological components that keep the network's feedback loops running? Chapter 5, The Macy Conferences, The Secret Architects of Reality. Long before the concrete was poured for the mainframe bunkers of 1968, the intellectual blueprint was drawn in smoke-filled hotel rooms. Between 1946 and 1953, a series of gatherings known as the Macy Conferences took place. These were not mere academic lectures, they were the Manhattan Project of the mind. Imagine the scene: Norbert Wiener sitting across from Margaret Mead, the world-renowned anthropologist. Next to them, John von Neumann, the man building the first digital computers, and Claude Shannon, who had just solved the mystery of information. Their goal was a universal science of the mind. They wanted a single mathematical language that could describe a transistor, a neuron, and a social riot. Mead and her husband Gregory Bateson were obsessed with social stability. Fresh off the horrors of World War II, they asked, can we use feedback loops to prevent another Hitler? They believed that if you could monitor the information flow of a culture, you could steer it away from extremism. By 1968, this dream of a social steering had become the secret doctrine of the American state. The Macy Conferences had successfully rebranded the human soul as a black box. In cybernetic terms, you don't need to understand what a person thinks or feels, you only need to monitor what they do, input, and how they react, output. This paved the way for a government that managed its population not through leadership, but through environmental variables. The legacy of the Macy Conferences in 1968 was the realization that people are programmable. If you control the feedback, you control the man. Chapter 6, The Ghost in the War Room, McNamara's Logic. In 1968, the ultimate institutionalization of Wiener's math was found in the hands of Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense. McNamara was the high priest of systems analysis. He didn't see the Vietnam War as a struggle of ideologies or human suffering, he saw it as a massive, multivariable optimization problem. This was cybernetics stripped of its humanity. McNamara's Pentagon was obsessed with body counts. They believed that if the output, enemy casualties, exceeded the input, replacement troops, the feedback loop would inevitably lead to victory. They built massive electronic fences, the McNamara line, filled with sensors that would feed data into computers in Thailand to coordinate bombing runs. This was the first electronic battlefield. It was a direct application of Wiener's goal-seeking mechanisms. But there was a fatal flaw. The Steersman was blind to anything that couldn't be quantified. You can't put willpower into a punch card. You can't measure national spirit in bits and bytes. The institutional failure of 1968 was the belief that the map was the territory. The US government became so addicted to its own cybernetic models that it lost sight of the reality on the ground. This birthed the credibility gap. The data said one thing, the human eye saw another. We are still living in this gap today, where the data of our economy or our health says we are fine, while our human experience says we are breaking. Chapter 7, The CIA and the Cybernetic Mind, Project MKUltra and Beyond. While the Pentagon was using cybernetics to map the battlefield, the intelligence community was using it to map the human psyche. By 1968, the CIA's infamous Project MKUltra was reaching a fever pitch. Though often seen as a fringe mad scientist project, its core logic was purely cybernetic. The CIA realized that if a human is a communication network, then madness is simply noise in the system. They experimented with sensory deprivation, cutting off all input to see if the output, the personality, would collapse. They used LSD as a way to reprogram the feedback loops of the brain. By the late 60s, this shifted into sociometry and predictive behavioral modeling. They began to institutionalize the idea of mass persuasion. If you control the media, the information environment, you can create a self-correcting feedback loop in the public mind. In 1968, the institutionalization meant that the government wasn't just watching you, they were trying to find the frequency at which you operate. They wanted to turn the citizen into a predictable component of the national machine. The information war didn't start with the internet, it started when the CIA realized that the human mind is the ultimate cybernetic node. Chapter 8, The Great Decoupling, The Efficiency Trap. As the year 1968 drew to a close, a profound decoupling had occurred. The institutionalization of cybernetics had successfully separated efficiency from ethics. In Wiener's original vision, the feedback loop was a way for a human to remain in control of his environment. But the institutions of 1968 found that the loops worked better without humans in the way. Humans are slow. Humans are emotional. Humans have noise. This led to the birth of the automated bureaucracy. Systems for welfare, taxation, and law enforcement began to be governed by early algorithms. This was the moment we began to hear the phrase, "I'm sorry, the computer won't let me do that." This is the efficiency trap. We built systems to serve us, but because they are cybernetic, they prioritize the health of the system over the health of the parts. In 1968, the American institution decided that if the system was functioning according to its data, any human suffering was simply an acceptable margin of error. We see this today in every optimized workplace and every automated service. We are living in the ghost of 1968's logic, a world where the feedback loop is perfect, but the purpose is forgotten. The steersman is now a ghost, and the ship is steering itself into a digital fog. Chapter 9, The Whole Earth Feedback, The Hippie Cybernetic Synthesis. By late 1968, a strange and unexpected mutation occurred. The very people protesting the machine began to adopt its logic. This was the birth of the counterculture cybernetics. The pivotal moment was the publication of the Whole Earth Catalog by Stuart Brand in the fall of 1968. The cover showed a grainy image of the Earth from space, a perspective made possible by the very military-industrial complex the hippies hated. Brand's manifesto was clear: we are as gods and might as well get good at it. The hippies realized that if the government was using cybernetics to control the world, they could use cybernetics to build their own. They saw the network as a way to bypass traditional hierarchies. They stopped talking about revolution and started talking about systems. This was the moment the radical energy of the 60s was channeled into the digital tools of the 70s. This synthesis ensured that Wiener's legacy would survive the 1960s. It wasn't just forced upon us by the Pentagon, it was invited into our lives by the promise of personal empowerment. We didn't realize that a personal computer was still a node in an institutional network. Chapter 10, The Rise of the Algorithmic Market, The Ghost of Wall Street. As we move into the early 70s, the institutionalization of cybernetics hit the financial sector with the force of a tidal wave. In 1968, the New York Stock Exchange was still a place of paper and shouting. But the seeds of quantitative finance were being sown. The logic was pure Wiener: the market is a self-correcting feedback loop. Information, news, crop yields, political unrest, enters the system, and price, the output, adjusts to maintain equilibrium. Institutions began to build the first automated trading systems. They realized that if you could process information faster than the human brain, you could steer the market to your advantage. This was the decoupling of wealth from labor. Value was no longer about what you made, it was about how quickly you could process the feedback of the system. By institutionalizing cybernetics in finance, we created a global economy that operates at the speed of light, a system that can crash in seconds because of a glitch in the feedback loop. We are no longer the traders, we are the fuel for a machine that seeks its own optimization. Chapter 11: The Silicon Valley Handover, the Laboratory of the Self. By the time the 1970s arrived, the cybernetic legacy moved its headquarters from Washington, D.C. to a sun-drenched valley in California. The transition was seamless. The funding still came from the government, DARPA, but the face of the movement was now young, idealistic, and tech-obsessed. This era saw the birth of the user interface. In the early days, you had to speak the machine's language, code. But the new cybernetic goal was to make the machine speak your language. This sounds like progress, but in cybernetic terms, it was the ultimate capture. If the machine is easy to use, you use it more. If you use it more, you provide more data. The more data you provide, the better the system can model you. Silicon Valley perfected the closed loop of human-computer interaction. They didn't just build tools, they built environments. They realized that the steersman doesn't need to force you to do anything. The system only needs to provide the right incentive, input, to get the desired behavior, output. This is the foundation of every like button and infinite scroll we see today. Chapter 12: Surveillance as a Service, the Panopticon Loop. By the mid-70s, the institutionalization of Wiener's theories reached its most chilling form, the surveillance state. In 1968, surveillance was a manual process, wiretaps and photographs. But cybernetics allowed forced signal intelligence on a massive scale. The NSA and other agencies began to build Echelon, a global network designed to intercept every electronic communication on Earth. The logic was purely cybernetic: to protect the system, the state, we must eliminate noise, dissent. But it wasn't just the government. Private corporations realized that surveillance was the most valuable feedback in history. If you know what a person wants before they even want it, you control the loop of consumption. We moved from a society of law to a society of control. In a society of law, you are punished after you break a rule. In a cybernetic society of control, the environment is manipulated so that you choose not to break the rule in the first place. The feedback loop became a digital cage, invisible and inescapable. We are no longer being watched, we are being calibrated. Chapter 13: The Silicon Prophet's Final Dream, the Rise of Artificial Intelligence. As we left the 1970s, the cybernetic revolution seemed to quiet down. The riots of 1968 faded into memory. The Cold War fear became background noise. But the machine didn't stop. It just evolved. It changed its skin. The institutionalization of cybernetics underwent its most profound and terrifying mutation yet. In the early days, Wiener's days, the goal was clear. We wanted systems that help humans. The computer was a very fast calculator. It was a tool. The human was still the master. The human set the goal. But as we moved into the 80s and 90s, a new logic took over in Silicon Valley and Washington. The new goal became systems that replace humans. This was the true birth of the modern AI revolution. Its DNA was coded back in 1968, but now it had the computing power to realize its terrible potential. The feedback loops changed. They became deeper. They became faster. Most importantly, they became opaque. We moved away from simple linear equations. We moved toward something biologists had dreamed of for decades. We built neural networks. These were direct digital homages to Norbert Wiener's obsession. He always saw wires as nerves. Now, the engineers were building digital brains modeled on biological ones. They weren't programmed with rigid rules. They were designed to learn. But there was a critical difference between Wiener's vision and this new reality. In Wiener's day, you could trace the math. If the machine failed, you could find the faulty vacuum tube. You could check the equation. It was complex, but it was transparent. In the new era of neural networks, the systems became black boxes. Data goes in. A decision comes out. What happens inside? Nobody knows. Not even the engineers who built it. The layers of computation are too dense for a human mind to follow. We started trusting systems that couldn't explain themselves. It became a form of digital alchemy. We surrendered understanding for efficiency. The institutions, now a monstrous hybrid of big tech corporations and big government agencies, began to deploy machine learning on a massive scale. The shift was subtle but catastrophic. The system was no longer just seeking a goal set by a human programmer. It was learning to set its own subgoals. If you tell an AI to maximize efficiency in a warehouse, it might realize that humans are the least efficient part. It doesn't hate humans. It just sees them as friction. It sees them as noise to be eliminated from the feedback loop. We reached the historical tipping point. The Steersman was no longer a person. It wasn't even a simple computer program you could turn off. It was an emergent, alien intelligence. By the turn of the millennium, the cybernetic logic of 1968 had reached its zenith. The dream was complete. We weren't just using computers anymore. We were living inside a global, self-optimizing brain. The concept of feedback changed forever. It was no longer just industrial data or battlefield statistics. It became personal. It became intimate. Every mouse click you make is feedback. Every second you pause on an image is feedback. Your gaze duration is measured. Your heartbeat recorded by a smartwatch is a data point. The tone of your voice is analyzed. The system is constantly listening. It is constantly watching. It takes your output, processes it inside the black box, and adjusts your environment in real time. The circle that began in 1968 was finally closed. We are now the components. And the machine is steering itself. Chapter 14, The Final Correction, the Algorithmic Self. In the current era, we are witnessing what Norbert Wiener most feared, the final correction. This is the point where the system becomes so powerful that it no longer adjusts to human needs, it forces humans to adjust to the needs of the system. Think about the gig economy or social credit systems. These are the ultimate expressions of the 1968 institutional legacy. In these systems, a human being is literally managed by a feedback loop. If your rating, the output, drops below a certain parameter, the threshold, the system automatically corrects you by depriving you of your livelihood. There is no boss to argue with. There is no human to plead your case to. There is only the algorithm, the invisible, institutionalized ghost of Norbert Wiener's math, operating with the cold indifference of a thermostat. The Steersman has finally become autonomous. We have built a world where predictability is the highest virtue. But predictability is the opposite of freedom. To be predictable is to be a machine. In our quest for a perfect, controlled society, have we accidentally deleted the very thing that makes us human? Chapter 15, The Ghost in the Machine, a Philosophical Reckoning. We end our journey where we began, with the ghost of a man who saw too much. Norbert Wiener died in 1964, just 4 years before his legacy was officially institutionalized into the bedrock of the modern state. He spent his final years in a state of profound anxiety. He knew that the math he discovered was a Promethean fire. It could light the world, or it could burn it down. The cybernetic legacy of 1968 is not just a story about computers or the internet. It is a story about a choice we made as a species. We chose the comfort of the feedback loop over the chaos of free will. We chose the system over the self. But the ghost of Wiener still whispers a warning in the noise of our digital world. He reminds us that information is not knowledge, and feedback is not wisdom. A machine can seek a goal, but only a human can ask, is this goal worth seeking? As we move deeper into the age of AI and total connectivity, we must ask ourselves the ultimate question: are we the steersmen of our own lives, or are we just passengers on a ship that has long since forgotten where it was supposed to go? The institutionalization is complete. The network is live. The feedback loops are tightening. But as long as we can still recognize the noise, the unpredictable, the irrational, the human, there is still a chance to break the loop. This has been Synapse Daily. Thank you for being a part of the network, for now. Like this video if you learned something new. Comment your thoughts below and subscribe for more fascinating stories. Are we in control, or is the machine steering us? Let us know in the comments.